So this new sandbox has been out for the past 2 weeks. Now I really wanted to play trials. I wanted to see were these dynamic cooldowns, these super tiers, all of these various changes that came to every ability across the board. Was it a good change? Was this a good update? And is this a direction Destiny 2's PvP needs to go? Now a lot of this gameplay, or all of this gameplay, is actually trials gameplay from this past weekend. We're popping off with some Forerunner, pairing it with Shiora's Wrath, playing Top Tree Dawnblade, and one of my favorite things to use in this sandbox right now is actually firebolt grenades. And not offensively, purely just consuming the grenade. Firebolt grenades actually have one of the fastest cooldowns amongst grenades, and on Top Tree Dawnblade, that means a hell of a lot more usage of heat rises. Therefore, I'm taken to the sky much more often, which on a map like Bannerfall is really, really good. And by the way, many of you commented yesterday on our Forerunner video and said that Forerunner is only good against trash players. My man, we did carries all weekend long with Forerunner. This weapon is disgusting. The only thing it requires you to do is to give up that shotgun or that sniper rifle, which I know many of you will never do, which is fine. I just happen to like rocking the Halo meta, at least for the time being. With that being said though, let's talk about these dynamic cooldowns. First up, if you played trials this past weekend, you might have noticed the lack of supers per game. And by lack of supers, I mean literally next to no supers unless the game was like a 3-3 or 4-4 game. It really had to stretch into those later rounds, even if you were slaying out, for you to get a super. Now understand, super regeneration got a complete rework. First up, super energy is now primarily generated by dealing and taking damage. Secondly, super energy and its regeneration amount varies based on the target type and damage source, meaning your primary weapons will actually give you more super energy. They also reduce the super gain on kills, assists, and objective captures, and they reduce passive super energy regeneration speed. And then they broke everything up into tier lists. Now they actually put Well of Radiance at the top, and as we know going into Witch Queen, they're eventually going to put Bubble Titan there at the top, because in Witch Queen we're going to have Void 3.0, and they're going to be able to separate Sentinel Shield from Ward of Dawn. So Bubble Titans will actually be right up there next to Well of Radiance. And then you got Blade Barrage, Silence and Squad tier 4. Tier 3 consists of Shadow Shot, Burning Maul, Arc Staff, Nova Bomb, Thunder Crash. Tier 2, Golden Gun, Chaos Reach, Nova Warp, Storm Trance, Daybreak, Sentinel. And then Tier 1, which is the slowest regeneration, Spectral Blades, Fist of Havoc, Hammer of Soul, Glacial Quake, and Winter's Wrath. Now, someone who rocked Hammer of Soul all the time in 6v6 and regular trials, it was super noticeable the moment I went inside of PvP. I mean, I used to go from having 3 to 4 supers per game to then barely getting 2. And normally the second super was getting popped as the game was ending. So that tier 1 of supers is a huge nerf to its regeneration. So much so, we even had a game the other day and we posted the live footage of it, but it was essentially a comeback game of ours, and it came down to the wire. It came down to 4-4. The enemy team is actually hiding inside, waiting for their Hammer Titan to get their hammer, and lo and behold, he doesn't get it in time. And a lot of you ask, wow, why didn't they push? They were literally waiting for that Hammer Titan to get a super, but because the passive regeneration is next to nothing on these tier 1 supers, even though he was right there, just about to get a super, he didn't get it in time. Fellas, this is a 4-4 game. That man had not popped a super the entire time, and he still didn't have a super after that much time. Needless to say, the way the sandbox is designed now is you have to partake in the fight, because if you don't, you can no longer sit and wait in your spawn like you used to be able to do inside of trials and wait for your super to come to you. It's just not gonna happen. And that seemed to be a common theme this past weekend. So many of these clips are gunplay clips because that's essentially what PvP is becoming. It's becoming more gunplay oriented. This dynamic cooldown system, these tiers, everything about it has completely changed Destiny 2's PvP. So much so that purely from a competitive perspective, Destiny is actually in the best state that it's ever been. Are there weapons that are still outliers? Yes. DMT is back on the menu. Forerunner is absolutely disgusting. There's a couple other outliers depending on your input device. Last word, controller, linear fusion rifles. Listen, we've always mentioned before that the outliers need to be weapons and not necessarily this overabundance of our supers and essentially turning the game into mayhem everywhere you go. Now, my complaints about the tier system, and this is just a reality of it, is that it really does change what you use, especially in game modes like trials, which is why when they break this up in these tier systems, when you get down in those tier 1s, Bungie's gonna have to do a really good job, especially going into the 3.0 version of our subclasses, of making those subclasses have good neutral game to make up for the slowness of their super regeneration. Because you got things like tier 3 that really are good supers. Thunder Crash, I know everyone considers it to just be a shutdown super, but it's a tier 3 super. It has some of the best neutral game, and honestly, I get multi-kills with it all the time, if not more so than the other supers in tier 2 and tier 1. Arc Staff is another example. Arc Staff is super meta with a variety of things in that neutral game department, and it's also a really good super on top of that, especially in 3v3 modes. I think the balance overall here though, based on Trials, from a competitive perspective, the mission was accomplished. There's definitely been a slowdown in ability usage and more emphasis on gunplay. Now with that being said, Trials is only really one part of the Crucible experience. I know it's the in-game experience, the pinnacle activity, but there's a lot of people that just love playing 6v6. And a statement that was brought up on stream by a couple other people coming in, and even myself when I first picked up Hammer of Soul, was that I felt like the game felt slow. You see, previously I felt like 6v6 was so chaotic with the amount of supers and abilities and everything else that was happening. It truly was like Mayhem Light. Now though, it is emphasizing more gunplay, but there is some unfortunate results of this, at least inside of 6v6. Number one, deathballing is becoming more common. If you remember from back inside of Destiny 2 during vanilla launch, there was a lot of deathballing. Essentially, entire teams just constantly moving together as one. Even if you do challenge someone, you're going to be challenging 3 or 4 opponents at the same time. Now, there are ways to break this up. Way number one was special weapons. A shotgun to the face, a sniper rifle, a fusion rifle. That really does break things up because even if you do die, it's a good chance you can get a trait. Another way to break it up was really abilities. And honestly, abilities were the best way to break up deathballing. Nothing breaks it up more than that. Unfortunately, inside of 6v6, at least for certain subclasses, having those abilities available has been reduced. Now, some of them, of course, have been increased. And for a lot of things, Well of Radiance has actually been one of the most go-to subclasses for me inside of PvP 6v6. And I just play support. I'm also rocking like a lot of Omni Oculus, giving my teammates invisibility. It really does feel like the rise of support classes inside of regular 6v6. But unfortunately, the result with the diminished amount of abilities that are available and with supers also getting a reduction, you see a lot more teams holding hands. Now, Bungie has done this intentionally, in my opinion, because they're like, hey, yes, your abilities have longer cooldowns. Some of them are a little more lethal, but require a little more precision. Deathballing is becoming more common again. Oh no, what do we do? Oh, we've got subclass 3.0. And now we're gonna have all these various ways of buffing our abilities, our supers, and who knows, maybe even ways to buff our super regeneration via aspects and fragments with the new 3.0 system, which will probably be the case, guys. You know, we talk about Void 3.0 and all the things that are coming with it. Just the separation there of Ward of Dawn, Bubble Titan, and Sentinel Shield, that's already a huge step. But then you have things like Nova Bomb. Imagine in Void 3.0, they give you an option to turn your Nova Bomb into a Shattered Nova Bomb. If y'all remember that from Destiny 1. Not necessarily changing the cooldown of your super, it'll probably still be a tier 3 super, but the fact that you're throwing essentially 3 mini Nova Bombs is a buff there in its lethality. And a lot of people talk about getting a shutdown with Nova Bomb is difficult, and it is, especially against players that know how to move and bait and everything else. But against a Nova Bomb that's in its Shattered variant, it's very hard. That's got a lot of spread, and of course, depending on how you cast it, can even bring about more spread. So long story short, this was all intentionally done, and Bungie's been saying this for a long time, that the dynamic cooldowns, the tier system for our supers, all of this stuff was made in preparation for 3.0. So I do see regular Crucible, Ironbender, Control, etc. getting better with the new 3.0 subclasses coming to the game. It will break up that deathballing. Now, considering that Trials is in a good state right now with this current sandbox, will 3.0 mess up Trials of Osiris? I don't know. Perhaps. And that's a balance Bungie's gonna have to decide. But from what I'm seeing now, it seems like a lot of the sandbox changes were made from the Trials playlist down, which is why I completely understand why certain players think regular 6v6 and Control, Ironbender, etc. just feels boring. I also want to bring up though that matchmaking in general inside of 6v6 just seems funky. Whether it's win percentage, skill-based matchmaking, whatever, between both Ironbender and regular Control, it's pretty bad whenever I would just rather play Trials, even on the sweatiest weekend, over regular Crucible. Now granted, perhaps that was Bungie's intent all along. Either way it goes, if you like a Destiny sandbox that emphasizes more gunplay, that is no longer mayhem, even in game modes like Trials, if you like supers to be popped as a means to counter other supers, and not necessarily a means to end matches quickly or quicker or contribute to that snowballing effect, now may be the time to give Destiny 2's PvP a go. For the longest time, the way Trials has been is that the team that's already up by 3 rounds will then get a super by the 4th round, and then it will be GG. The way things are now, even with max intellect, even with you slaying out, it's a good chance you won't get a super. And as long as you on the opposing team, even if you're losing a round and you're actually getting gunfire out, primary gunfire out into your opponent, you too are contributing to that super regeneration. The biggest benefits out of all of this is that the passive teams, the teams that sit in the back and wait for their supers and never push until they have a super, those are the teams that are getting punished the most. And I gotta say, guys, from that perspective, I'm a huge fan. Let me know in the comments below, guys, what you think. Are you liking this current sandbox? And by the way, if you happen to miss our DMT review or a live look of how Forerunner performed inside of Trials, feel free to check out the cards above. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.